Welcome back, fixed blade aficionados, and particularly those interested in this special form of fixed blade. Well, I wanted to do a survey of Pikal knives, talk a little bit about Pikal knives, a little bit of the origin, and some of what's going on today with the Pikal knife craze. Seems like everybody's getting into it, and certainly there's some good products coming out of that interest. Um, I've got quite a few that fall into this category, and a number of them are folders, but most of them are fixed blade. So I figure I would hit the folding Pikal knives a little later on in a separate video. And for this video, focus on these 6 fixed blade knives. I also have a number of different fixed blade knives that can suffice to support the role of a Pikal or point down edge in style knife. And I didn't include those. I might do that on a later video. But for now, we've got these 6 and we'll go right down the line. This is a Dirk Pinkerton Smilodon. That's a special design that I requested with the handle from a slightly different model knife married to the Smilodon blade that Dirk is well known for. Here's another Smilodon by Dirk, being a little smaller and double edge. Here is the Virus by Blackrock Knives, one of his first Pikal knife designs. Here is the Drog by Rib Splitter Knives. It's my only rib splitter knife, and it's a fine one. We'll take a closer look at that in a minute or two. Here is the Feral, a brand new design from Dirk Pinkerton Customs. And finally, here is the Anomaly. It's the only production knife on the table, and that is a design by Bastian Coves of Bastinelli Knives. And that Anomaly is one that I believe he co-designed with Doug Markida. Kind of a hybrid between a karambit ring knife and a point down edge in Pikal knife. Okay, so I've got a long history in the martial arts. I've mentioned this before. Don't want to go on and pat myself on the back. And I'm older and I've been doing this for a long time, and I'm not as active in the martial arts as I used to be. But I put in a good 50 years or so in the martial arts in various different styles, beginning with the Japanese styles of judo and karate, and went on from there to Chinese kung fu, practiced that for a good 10 years and went pretty far into it. Then went into Filipino Kali, and that was kind of a changing point for me that made a lot of sense out of other techniques that I had learned. And then in between times, did some kendo, did some goju karate, and some kyokushin karate. There you go. That's a real quick timeline for me. As I say, I don't want to dwell on that, but I've got a background in weaponry, everything from swords and long bladed weapons to sticks and knives and swords and sabers and what have you. Um, what was interesting was my first foray into weapons in the Chinese martial arts was that my instructor gave me a cut-off broom handle to learn to wield as a Chinese dandao sword. When I finally got the sword, I was extremely appreciative and had learned everything, all the techniques with a stick, which is kind of interesting. So just an aside for you there. Let's go right down the line. And while I'm showing you this Anomaly by Bastinelli knives, I will say that when we say Pikal, that's a Filipino term. I believe that the term exists in both Visayan and Tagalog dialects of the Filipino language. And it means to rip and tear, and um, I believe also jab, because when we learned it, it was with a double-edged knife, mainly training knives to start with, wooden knives and sticks. And not only could you jab and rip, it wasn't so much going right after this claw-like movement, because few of the knives that we used were claws. Later on, I learned to use a karambit, but not so much in the primary techniques that are taught of empty hand, stick, and knife and sword in the Filipino martial arts. So the whole thing with making these hooks and these claws came a bit later. It was recommended to me that a good 3-inch double-edged knife made a perfect Pikal knife because it was lightweight. You could flick it like this, you could jab with it suddenly, and you could also trap with it. So the concept of trapping is to stop a hand or a weapon coming your way and to control it by hooking it and grabbing it with the blade. We did a lot of that, trapping and grabbing. So these knives, when they say they're Pikal knives, take it from the point down, edge in concept of Filipino martial arts. More recently, we have the emergence of a style that isn't really a style, but it is a methodology and a technique promoted by Ed Calderon, former DEA agent, I believe, and someone working in Mexico, anti-cartel, and so on and so forth. And, you know, he got into the nitty gritty of the real world knife um, tactics and techniques and how the bad guys use them as well as how the good guys can learn to defend against them. And that is was kind of born out of the Elvia fruit knife that his mother had carried both for utility and for defense. And apparently she fended somebody off once with one of those. Well, I'm going on and it's like almost 7 minutes, so I don't want to yak too much about that. But most of these hook type blades today, although we call them Pikal, actually our pronunciation was Pakal, Pakal, but that's just a romanization for, you know, a language that we aren't familiar with. So Pikal, Pakal, whatever you like to call it. The hook style knife was sort of evolved out of the Elvia knife and the Ed's Manifesto, Libre fighting, and all of that that's sort of allied with Ed Calderon's techniques. So it became more of an animal claw, and many of them are even raised up higher than what you see here. Now, what I believe Bastian Coves and Doug Marcaida attempted to do here was marry the best of a karambit with a ring. And by the way, the Libre fighter guys don't like rings on the knives. Calderon doesn't like it, so I hear, because of the propensity of having the knife grabbed away and having the fingers broken off and also not being able to switch the knife. That's a different discussion for another day, but this is the only one on the table that does have a ring. But you can see that that point is raised up and we have the ability to thrust and rip with it. But you also have the ability to do a flicking jabs, to jab down on a hand coming in towards you as you sidestep, to grab and trap. And you don't need to use the ring on this. In fact, the ring can be used as a striking implement. So that is the anomaly, and that is a skeletonized knife. It has no handle slabs on it, extremely thin, extremely hideoutable. And I don't know if I'll show you the sheaths for all these or not. Basically, they all have Kydex sheaths. Here is the Ferrule by Dirk Pinkerton. Just came out, and I believe this is the first or one of the first. And I snagged it off of a table of a photograph of knives that he showed me when I asked him if he had anything new to sell, and this was one of them. And apparently this is very popular and is going to be, we're going to see a lot more of these. In my review on this one, I called the material micarta, or called it G10. It's not G10, it's micarta. And it has these interesting cutouts milled into it here, kind of a texture for you. And it definitely suffices in that form factor that the Elvia Libre fighters tend to like. That raised point, and sometimes you see that point raised way up here. I kind of like it to be more in a line with the handle as this is. It is slightly raised. Well, if you go this way, it is significantly raised above the handle. But in the hand, it with the handle being angled slightly, the point lowers just a bit. But it definitely has that arc, definitely has a sharp cutting surface, is a small knife, easy to carry. And by the way, all of these can be used in this grip with the point up and the edge back so that you can hook and pull and come in with your thrusts. We do these two thrusts in Filipino knife fighting. So this could definitely be adapted to that. Kind of like, I believe it's Craig Douglas, South Narc, some of the clinch pick that he designed. That was his primary use, was to have the edge in. He was also the guy that designed the Spyderco Pikal. Here is a Smilodon. Until I was corrected, I was calling them Smilodons. It's Smilodon, the Sabertooth tiger. And here is one that one of Dirk's original designs for Pikal, in which the point is raised, but it is raised up this way rather than the tip coming up this way. The whole axis of the blade is raised. This is double edge. And as with many of Dirk's smaller knife designs, it is just enough to hold with all four fingers, and you can get a solid grip on that. This is heavily textured G10, almost sandpaperish, and that's a good thing because with a small handle, I want a good grip. This is another one that can be held this way, but you got to be careful. Don't lay your thumb on top if you're used to doing that. You will find out quickly that that was a mistake. So beautiful double edge here, can cut on the way out, can cut and rip on the way in. We've got the point lined up nicely for that thrust and pull and for trapping techniques. And that is a fairly short, like 3.5-inch-ish blade. Moving on to the drog, and I understand the drog is like a Scandinavian ghost or some such thing. Oh, the undead, that's what it is. And this is a rib splitter knife. I forget the name of the material, but it is a man-made resin sort of material with this beautiful gold flecks and streaks in it. You know, it's interesting that the knife is so ancient looking and business-like out here and so pretty in the handle. It's an interesting contrast. So the drog, you notice, has more of an arcing blade and it's a little longer. My problem with this is that in this motion, that tip is down a little bit too much for me. I prefer that tip being more forward in the natural arc of the hand. Certainly you can come up high and pull down and that point's going to do its business. And even here, you certainly are not going to, you know, that point isn't going to bounce off of anything. But you can see that it arcs down a little bit more. Not my preference in a Pikal knife, but very effective nonetheless. And really nice the way he does this kind of ancient, I guess is the only word that I can use for it. Very worn, tool-like look to the surface. I know that technique has a name. And this is a carbon steel blade. I don't know the steel, but each one of these knives you see here has a individual review out on my channel. You want to learn more about it, check out those reviews. Moving down to one of my very favorite makers, along with Mr. Pinkerton and certainly Mr. Cohen's, who doesn't have any Pikal knives here that I am aware of. I may have one or two. I might have missed one from him. Who knows? I think I don't have Pikal knives from Alex Cohen's, but maybe in the near future. This is the Virus. And you'll notice that we've got the biohazard symbol there. Made by BlackRock Knives, Ken Vihikate, the proprietor and the custom maker. It's a chisel ground knife. A lot of people don't like the chisel grind, but let me tell you, it's every bit as effective for the purpose as a V-ground knife. This also is a high carbon steel knife. And I don't have it in the mind at the moment, but suffice it to say, oil it up, take care of it, it will rust. But he puts a very nice black patina on all his knives, and then he rubs them or tumbles them, I believe, to get the high spots to wear off. And looking at the geometry of this blade, again, we have a high raised point, and you really lock your hand in with this bird's beak style pommel on this. Your hand is completely locked in. You can cap your thumb over the top. It is effective for me in that now we have the point leading, not going down, but going forward of the motion of the arm and the hand. And then, of course, you can rip at the end. So you have that arc going through there. And yes, this one also, because we got some nice jimping there, can be used in this position. Again, we can thrust in and pull in both directions, doing these lateral techniques. And we got a nice gray G10 on this one. Can also make some really excellent Kydex sheaths. I'd say probably some of the best Kydex sheaths of any custom maker that I've seen. Finally, here is another Smilodon. See, I almost said Smilodon again. Another Smilodon. And this one, as I began to say in the beginning, is a larger handle. And again, with a pommel that sticks out where your hand locks in, regardless of what position you're in. For me, it's exactly perfect. I've got just what I want there as far as a grip goes. I need no more, no less. This one's a little marginal for me, but I can still deal with it. But I really, really like the security of this handle. And we've got pretty much the same blade going on as the other Smilodon, except we've got more of a point here. We've got more of a reverse tanto, if you want to call it that. On this one, kind of a Warncliffe look to it, but still we have that point leading, you see. And Dirk has made folding versions of this knife, which he calls the inversion. The first one was with Kaiser. And then I think there's going to be one coming out that's made by possibly Concept, possibly another company. We're going to see, and that's going to be a new and improved version of the inversion. And he's going to take away some of this here and make this a little bit steeper or less steep, all right, a little shallower. So you get a little more leading point. But that's a beautiful knife also. Steel on this one is Elmax. It's nice that he marks them. I think on this one we have CTS XHP. Yep. So that's stainless. This one here is out of 3V. And this one here is from M390. And as far as this one and this one goes, I'm not sure of the carbon steels that are being used. Well, there you go. Almost 20 minutes, and I've talked myself out. Hope I haven't bored the hell out of you guys. We're going to go on next at some future point to a folding Pikal knife review and see what that turns up. As always, don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe. This old sword will be back with you soon.